I did an episode with a couple of young writers who were writing about climate fiction. And so that social issue of climate change, of treating our planet with some respect. And I try not to get into where I'm telling someone how they should think. I try and let the author talk about it in ways that is natural to them. And then if I feel like there's an opportunity for me to say how I feel about something, then I go on and do it then.
When you're looking for guests, are you looking specifically for books that deal with social issues, or is it more of you're worried about the fiction side of it, and the you use whatever they give you to draw back to the social issues or politics or whatever it may be? All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the I Didn't Read Your Book podcast. I am your host, Lutch, and today we are doing something a little bit different. I wasn't exactly sure whether to make this a podcast episode or to do this as like an IDRYB live or something else, but I feel like it really does fit, and if you are a fan of previous IDRYB episodes, I definitely think you will enjoy this one. Today, I'm going to be talking to Dan Smith about his podcast, Coffee in Space. And the reason that I'm going to be talking about another podcast is because this is another podcast where Dan, the host, speaks to authors. And so what we're going to do is kind of just compare notes and compare experiences and see what what it's been like for us, and what it's been like for him, what are the differences, all that kind of stuff. And just like another author that we might have, I think this will be a really cool peek into people creating stuff, whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a stand-up comedy special or anything else. Content is content, and it's not all equal, but it is all great. So before we get into speaking with Dan, I don't have a synopsis to read, but we can take a peek at the website. So this is the Coffee in Space podcast. So we've got our logo here. So again, with the typical format, I would have no idea what this is about, but because of the way that Dan and I found each other, I do kind of know what it's about. But let's read anyway. That's a really good question. Welcome to the Coffee in Space podcast. I'm so glad you've stopped by. I hope you'll give an episode or 3 a listen. Find your favorite author and maybe learn about an author you haven't met yet. You're going to love meeting these writers. I hope you find your next great read on this podcast. So that sounds very, very much like exactly what I do. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of what kind of things that we have in common, and what kind of things we don't. And since, again, we don't have a back of the book to read, let's dive right in and read about the show. Coffee in Space podcast is a show designed to get the best in established and up-and-coming speculative fiction writers in front of you, their readers. I want to help you learn more about who they are as people, how they write, and how they live, and maybe find a new author you'd like to read. Who knows? It has also become a mission of mine to highlight issues pertaining to our culture. I'll take a few moments after each interview to talk about something relevant to our time, as well as offer some tidbits of news that I think you'll find interesting. So again, very, very similar to in terms of goals, what we're doing, what he and I are doing. It's going to be interesting to see what those cultural messages are. I would assume that because the nature of both of our shows is being ourselves as a surrogate for you guys, his perspective is going to, well, it definitely is going to be very different than mine, but the ways in which we're different are going to be the crux of the difference in our shows. The shows hinge on the personality and the perspective of the host, respectively, because we're talking about somebody else's work. So I would assume that he reads the books. That, I mean, you know, I've got my excuse in the name, but I would imagine that if you talk to authors about their books, that you would read their book, unless you're specifically trying to not. But it doesn't say, because it doesn't say anything, I'm going to assume that. So I am looking at my brand new curved monitor, courtesy of donations to the channel. Thank you very, very much. Those support links are in the description below. I would greatly appreciate if you could help me continue to build this, to build a better product for you. But what I'm looking at, I want just something to go off of. I like to go into these conversations as raw as possible, but I don't want to just be like, so, hey, who are you? What do you do? What do you know? I want to have a little bit something. So we have here commentary. So what makes a person human? One of the things that impresses me so much about C. Robert Cargill's writing is that he explores what it means to be a human. Is it an original thought? Is it a soul? Is it the ability to use tools? Even inside the human species, what makes someone my equal? Is it someone at the same intelligence level? Someone of the same racial makeup? Economic condition? In American history, slaves were counted for 3 people for every 5 existing individuals for taxation and representation purposes. It's in our frickin' Constitution, or was. It was finally undone by the 13th Amendment in the Constitution in 1865. It was, back then as it is now, a political problem. If only freed people were counted, the northern states would have overwhelmed the southern states in Congress. If all persons in the South were counted, then the southern states would have overwhelmed the North, despite having fewer states represented. The compromise counted human beings based on race. That compromise, like the rest of slavery history, is a sick black mark on American and Western history. I submit that we are still paying for the Civil War even now. One of the things that happens in war is that we dehumanize the enemy. They become slurs and targets, not people, not human. This has always happened in all wars, by all sides. In some ways, perhaps it is human nature to devalue the opposition in a conflict so as to justify one's actions against that culture and people group. It's probably really hard to fight a war against someone you see as an equal. This isn't just a racism problem. I remember reading about Hun in the Sun, how Allied pilots would describe German fighter pilots in World War I. In World War II, they were called Jerry. I won't repeat that Japanese military men and civilian women were called what they were called in the same war, nor will I use the term the Vietnamese fighter. I guess as a white person, well, so I guess he's white. I feel I can use terms against other whites, whether, all right. It's no more right that an African-American person is use the N-word, but blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I mean, if you're being historical and, I think there's a big difference between calling people names, calling someone a Jap, and saying that in World War II, they called them the Japs. Those are 2 very different things. And, it's kind of sad that somebody who is exploring these things with such pure intentions feels the need to not only censor themselves, but take on the guilt of people who have used those words in a negative connotation and not able to feel comfortable saying that, no, I'm a good person. I didn't do anything wrong, and I'm not trying to do anything wrong. And maybe some of you would say that I'm wrong in that he is right, that whether he is having negative intentions or not, that the words have power. I don't subscribe to that. And so maybe that'll be that certainly shows a difference in perspective. But again, I'm also not white, so I might feel differently if I was white. So this goes further, of course, to society at large. Look at social media memes devaluing the opposition next time you're on Facebook or Twitter. It's probably a picture of a wild-eyed individual who's completely out of control. I'm picturing one of the conservatives' use against liberals even as I say this. Not that there aren't others used by the liberal side, both sides, for there seems to be only two sides one can pick between these days, do the same. I mean, fair enough. He brought it back and said that, it happens on both sides. It's interesting how I don't consider myself a conservative. I am more libertarian than anything else. And when I'm reading that, I am thinking of, the far leftist ideology. So it's interesting that that's where his mind goes first, and that's where my mind goes first. But again, we both say that both sides do it, so no harm, no foul, just pointing out a difference there. Diving back in, I just love how the main character has to decide how their humanity works. It's a very honest take, as is Cargill's take on what makes his robots human-like. I submit that were we to really believe the other person is a human, a fully valued human, we'd be slower to attack, degrade, and destroy. We'd realize that maybe those monuments need to come down because they celebrate a person tasked with defending the rights of slave owners. Maybe we'd realize the vast majority of cops don't hide behind their badges and that they're good citizens trying to protect other good citizens. Sadly, it's easier in most cases to assume the offensive. I hope we can end this instinctive response. As always, I'm grateful for you, my listeners, and I look forward to our next chat over a cup of coffee in space. So that was, I think just in those last couple paragraphs that really gave an interesting look into Dan's politics. He doesn't seem like he's too deep in the weeds of tribalism, but clearly he leans one way, and I hesitate to say I lean the other way. I would rather say I lean a different way. But that'll be really interesting to see how that affects our podcast and our experiences. Now, what I don't want to do is just turn this into a political debate. We can do that separately. What I want to do today is compare notes about our podcasts. So I'm specifically going to steer away from politics in terms of debating issues, because I can do that with anyone. And I can do that with Dan at a later date if he is interested. But what I can't do is talk with another person who does a very, very similar podcast to mine and compare experiences. I don't know how long he's been doing it, but it's likely longer than the few months that I have. So don't go in expecting the type of debate that you might see on an IDRYB live. I am specifically looking to take that and separate it as much as possible from the podcast itself. Now, oftentimes these conversations are super, super relevant to the book and to the author, but I don't want this to just be, I bring somebody on so that I can talk about what I want to talk, even though what I do want to talk about is the podcast. I would love to talk about the political implications of this and that, and but that is not what we're here for. So if all goes well, I'm sure, we could just like with Blaine Pardoe, just like with Andrew Regard, we have done hours of political content. But you're not gonna find too much of that here, I hope. I'm gonna try to keep it more about the podcasts and the work we do and our experiences. If it seems like he is somebody who would be good for a political conversation, we'll definitely do it. Definitely into it. But I just don't want you to go in, whether, if you're on the left or on the right, just, oh yeah, Lutch is going to hand it to him, or oh yeah, Lutch is going to get his ass handed to him. That's not what we're doing. So with that being said, let's bring in S. Daniel Smith. All right, and there he is. Welcome, Dan Smith. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on the show.
Not a problem. Got me out of bed early just for this, so I am excited. So as we talked about in the intro segment, you do have your own podcast, the Coffee in Space podcast.
Yes, that's true.
So I guess the first question is just what's your podcast about?
So on my podcast, Coffee and Space, I interview science fiction, fantasy authors. Mostly, I get into alt history as well and some horror, but mostly science fiction, fantasy authors. We talk about world building. We talk about writing systems, character development, and of course, we talk about books. We also talk about their views on social issues going on during our time. And we'll cover some of those periodically as well, particularly if it relates to the author's book. But that's kind of what we do. We talk about books, we talk about writing.
That's awesome. That's right up, exactly what I'm trying to do. It's a good thing we didn't, think of the same name.
Yeah.
It's really cool that you put it that way because I've had a podcast in the previously before this one where I wanted to kind of get my message out there, and then this podcast is more about you than it is about me, and so using this platform of the podcast itself as well as the other stuff that I do on the channel, that's really where I'm spending most of the time talking about things that are important to me and affecting the world if it's not brought up by an author. So when you're doing your podcast talking about books, is that an inherent part of the conversation going in?
The social issues or
This,
the
yeah, this
yeah.
the
It usually depends. Like for example, I interviewed Jordan Ifueko about she writes Afro fantasy novels, which I hate using that term because it's fantasy. It's fantasy. But because we in the world we put labels on everything. I think the world would call it Afro fantasy
that
and
just
so
mean
I had
fantasy
her.
with Black people?
Yeah, which which I
Fair enough.
have to be careful about how I say it too, because I want to treat it with respect. But when I had her on, I recorded the episode with her right before the riot started last year.
Mm.
And so and the episode was due to air as the riots were kicking off. And so we talked a little bit about it, but mostly that was a little bit off the air where I was like, hey, do you want me to delay this episode because it's a little sensitive right now? And to her credit, she's like, no, let's go on and go for it. Let's push forward and make
Good.
this happen. And then the pandemic itself has given me a lot of opportunities, particularly with science fiction, because even if a writer doesn't write directly about pandemic level things, diseases, things like that, there's usually a science fiction trope that we can discuss somewhere in there that deals with it. So we've been able to talk about that sort of thing as well. And then in interviewing female authors, women writers, there's been the opportunity to talk periodically about that social issue as well. So that's kind of how it kind of comes up. And obviously I want to do it organically, just like I'm sure you do. I don't want to make it feel forced because then I don't know if the message can get across. Oh, and I should say most recently, I did an episode with a couple of young writers who were writing about climate fiction. And so that social issue of climate change, of, treating our planet with some respect, things like that. And I try not to get into where I'm telling someone how they should think. I try and let the author talk about it in ways that is natural to them. And then if I feel like there's an opportunity for me to say how I feel about something, then I go on to do it then.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that because it's and especially if you have maybe this isn't the case. Is that a when you're looking for guests, are you looking specifically for books that deal with social issues, or is it more of you're worried about the fiction side of it and the you use whatever they give you to draw back to social issues or politics or whatever it may be.
Yeah, this podcast is designed to put science fiction writers and their books in front of an audience. And so that is the focus. The book is the focus. The writing is the focus. The social issues, they don't take a back seat necessarily, but they are not the focus of my podcast.
Gotcha. Yeah, then the question becomes, how do you find, if you are talking about a given book and something comes up with, maybe let's say it's a hot button issue with you you personally. Number one, there is addressing the issue. Number two, there is doing so in an appropriate way just for the conversation. Then you have to you have to balance the fact that you're hosting a show. You want to be respectful of the fact that the other person is a guest, all these things. So how do you balance all that?
Very, very carefully.
Must be.
What I try and keep in mind at all times is that because I am interviewing them about their writing and about their book, that if it's their social issue, particularly if it relates to the book, then I'm going to give them space to talk about it. And if it's a hot button issue that can come up naturally and we can discuss it, we'll discuss it. If it is something that I don't even agree with, I think that might even be the better thing to discuss, is if it's something I don't agree with. I try and remember that, again, I'm giving them space to talk about something that's important to them. I can always, and I'll be honest, I do pick guests every now and then for the sole purpose of discussing an issue that I think is important. I'm a person of faith, the Christian faith particularly. And so I do enjoy having a guest on every now and then that I can be a little more free discussing my faith with. And so I try and give a disclaimer before I go into that type of discussion, but it's an opportunity for me to do that as well. Climate fiction is another thing. I am concerned about climate change. And so, the opportunity arises to talk about it. That's great. But even if it comes up something I don't agree with, it's their book, and so I want to give them space to talk about it.
I've a couple of and it's interesting to say that, because I'm actually an atheist, and I've had a couple of Christian writers on my podcast, and it's actually been not the when I grew up Catholic. And I lost my faith, in college. I'm 32 now, so I'm past that militant atheist, I got to tell everybody what to think stage. And I am certainly past that nihilist. There's nothing. It's it's just this, and then you die. And I've developed an understanding that, okay, the religious people have something that they are appealing to. I personally don't believe it is the way they describe it, but to say that there's nothing would be arrogant, and to say that we know what it is would I would, if not arrogant, at least be naive, in my opinion. And so that's kind of where I stand with things in terms of religion. But that allows me to get the word out about what something that's very important to me is the values that I would think that both you and I, as human beings, even though you are a man of faith and I am against that, thinking that way, I think we hold the same values, down to the simple stuff of, we want to be happy, we want to feed our families, all that kind of stuff. I mean, my family is my dog, but you get my point. Yeah. And so like this is it's kind of playing out in real time for me, the question I just asked you. And it's a very delicate balancing act. So like given that you're saying that you will seek out people to talk about an issue that you want to talk about. So if you're looking to talk about your faith, would you go out looking for an? Are you a Christian? Are you?
I'm Christian, yeah.
So would you look for another Christian to talk to, or would you look for somebody like me, where you could explore it in a completely different way?
I've done both in a way. When I think it's probably safe to say in science fiction, the vast majority of authors lean at least towards your way of thinking more than my way of thinking. So that has kind of happened by default. And we have discussed things like evolution at a scale that I don't know that I agree with, but it's always an interesting conversation when that happens. So I'm happy to do it. And so I have had I had one author on particularly, and it was a really good episode. And the book isn't about faith or religion, but the main character is dealing with her family's ties to both Buddhism and to Christianity, and it's from a Chinese Malaysian background.
Oh,
And
okay.
so we were able to kind of have an open forum for just a few minutes. We didn't spend a whole lot of time on it, but I was able to talk to her about how first of all, I thought she treated the issue with respect. So it was easy for me to have that conversation. It wasn't like she had treated it as in a militant style. So that made it really easy.
Right.
So that was on her part. That was very effective, but, we were able to just chat about it, and it was a question that she didn't get asked very often because, people don't tend to think that way. When they're doing interviews, they want to know about the plot lines and things like that. And I just kind of wanted to talk about faith for just a minute. When it comes to Christian authors themselves, there are Christians who write science fiction, space opera. They have aliens. These are, I think the cliche is that Christians only write fantasy because there's allegory there. It's really easy to like, okay, who's the Jesus character in this story,
Right.
type of thing. And, and you C.S. Lewis and, Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. But there are Christians who write science fiction and space operas and whatnot. And so, we'll still talk about the book. The book is still the reason I had them on the show, but then we'll give a disclaimer. I'll let the audience know that I'm about to talk about faith for just a minute, and they can fast forward a few minutes if they want to. And then we just talk about it for a minute. So that's really all I do. And I don't often actually seek them out. There's been a couple of times where I have, either for Christian or for Buddhist. I actually haven't had a professing atheist on the show.
Oh.
I'm not against it. We'll figure out. We'll have to work out something.
Cool. Very, very, very cool. So that's, I mean, aside from the content itself, that is very much, my thinking as well when it comes to my podcast. That the sole purpose, not the sole purpose, the primary purpose is to find out who is the author behind the book. And like you're saying, sometimes depending on what it is, because I actually like to lean towards nonfiction because having not read the book, it's much easier to talk about something that exists rather than a confined story. Which I do both, and I enjoy both, and both have very different types of conversations. But it's it's a struggle, especially with the nonfiction stuff, to not put my personal thing in there too much. And the viewers might say I do it too much, but I try not to. So what got you started doing the Coffee and Space?
I'm glad you asked that. It was a pandemic project. I have been trying to become a more established writer myself. I have most of my published credits, almost all of them, in fact, are interestingly enough, in the religious periodical format with different magazines and whatnot. And I've wanted to write science fiction for a long time. So I befriended several science fiction writers on Twitter. They were all great. That was even back as, early 2000 teens, 2000 aughts. And I've had a lot of good friendships with them. And in doing so, I suddenly I'm working from home more. I've got time on my hands, and I'm like, how can I have these conversations with people that I really like talking to in a way that might also include something else I love, which is fiction in general. And so, or science fiction in general. And so I just thought, you know what, let's just do like 10 episodes. It'll be fun. COVID's going to be over by then anyway. They'll figure it out. Right. Naive Thoughts by Dan.
Oh, we all
Yeah.
did.
So
We
I
all
really,
thought it.
yeah, I really thought, 10 episodes, it'll be fun. I'll learn a bunch about writing and get to meet some cool people.
So sorry to interrupt your podcast experience. I just want to remind you, if you're enjoying what you're watching, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. And if you really love it, there's some support links in the description. I would love if you can help out the channel. And back to the show.
And 70 episodes. I think I just did episode 71 and a year and a half later or so, and I'm still growing strong. So that's really how it started. It was just I thought it'd be fun. It might help me build a platform for future writing that I do. But mostly I just wanted to have fun with it. And really, I just thought it was going to be about 10 episodes. And
that's interesting. And
it's been more than that.
Quite a bit. And there's a lot of projects, whether it's podcasts, books, movies, things that people have used that time in the lockdown to make something of it.
Yeah,
I was not one of those people. I was not living here until I've been here for about a year, and before I was living here, well, quick story. I was living in an apartment where it was a 1-bedroom apartment, but they had a breakfast nook that was just a room with a door. And so a friend and I rented it together, and we pretended to be together. And he just, the breakfast nook was his room, and I took the other room, and we just split the rent, which the people, if they found out, would not be very happy about. But they never found out. Only problem is they didn't allow dogs. And I don't know if you've seen Morty running around here, but I got my little dog here. And eventually I got some, service animal, it was some bullshit note. But they allowed him to be in the apartment. Great. So we signed the lease for the next year. What I didn't know was that I had to get a new letter with the new lease. And they didn't tell me. And they, again, they didn't want the dog there. And so they were happy to let that the time period lapse, and then I get a letter in the mail. You've been evicted for breaking the rules and having an animal in the house. So they gave us 30 days to get out, and so we're scrambling for a place to live. And 10 days before we were supposed to get out, my old roommate goes, I think I'm actually just gonna go live back home.
Nice.
I was like, all right. I mean, can't hate on that, but that really puts me in a shitty position. Yeah. So I was scrambling. I did have a couple places lined up, but they fell through. And I ended up, there was a lady from my mom's church. My parents are big Christians. And I mean, they're small, but they're big into Christianity. And there was a lady from their church who she has an extra bedroom in her house, and she doesn't like living alone just because she's not that mobile, and she's old. And so if there's a young man that she trusts, that she likes having somebody else in the house with her. So I ended up staying there as kind of like a backup. And I had to move everything I had into this tiny little room. And I was like, all right, it's $300 a month. I'll stay here for a couple months, figure something out. And, then everything started. And so like, I could have, used that opportunity to find a place. I could have used that opportunity to start the podcast. I could have all this stuff. And I just didn't. I just used all that time to lay around and do nothing. I would be
I
so,
did plenty of that too.
because I actually started recording, I think, in August and released my first episode in September. But man, I wish I could have used that time to we had so much of it,
Yeah.
and I just didn't do anything with it. So there's really something to be said about taking use of the time that you've got.
Yeah.
Luckily now I've got a different job than I did before the lockdown, and the hours that I work are much more flexible, so I have a lot more
That's
time
good.
to do this. But that's been another big thing for me is taking the time not just to schedule and have these conversations, but the editing and the posting and the social media.
Yes.
How do you do with that? I see I've got your website pulled up. It's a nice little website. You've got your design there. How active are you on your social media, and how active are you in the back end of your product?
I edit every episode to answer that question first. And so, if the conversation, I try and keep them around 35 to 40 minutes. So for a 35 to 40-minute conversation, I probably had to start with a 50-minute episode to kind of get out the ums and the ahs and the, random, phone ringing in the background or something like that, So I had to get, my kids opening the door and coming in, asking me a question, stuff like that. So there's editing there. So, really, if it's a 30-minute long podcast, I'm probably editing for a good hour, that given episode. So that's, as I'm sure you know all about, that's time that you have to delve into and develop. And then for social media, I started a group long before I started the podcast called Military Fans of Science Fiction and Fantasy, and just because I'm in the military, and so I'm pretty active
Thank you for
on
your
there.
service.
Oh, thank you. I'm pretty active on there, it's a very active group overall. I don't talk about the podcast all that much because I don't want it to all be about me, but that is where most of my social media conversations take place. Otherwise, it's Twitter, and I'm on Twitter way too much, especially since most of
Aren't
the
we
time
all?
I'm just angry about what's on Twitter.
That's what it's
And so,
there for, right?
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
it's there for.
I just get mad, and like I craft these great tweets in reply, and then I delete them because that's not what I'm trying to do. So, um, but I do some doom scrolling on Twitter. But I do also interact with authors on there too, and set up interviews and things like that. So, I can't tell you a time frame that I use for those events necessarily, because it may be something as 10 seconds to fire off a quick reply tweet or something, or just hit somebody up right quick, or it could be doom scrolling that doesn't actually affect positively my podcast, but I'm there anyway.
Yeah. That's I've always been really into just using social media. I'm kind of kind of a hermit and a loner, so it just naturally that's a good way to pass the time, even when
Yep.
I'm listening to a podcast or watching whatever on YouTube or watching a movie. I've usually got my phone in my hand scrolling
Yep.
through. And so being present on social media was never an issue for me, but the the I guess the balance of putting out my personal stuff that I want associated with the brand and the advertising of the actual content, that's a difficult balance. And I think
Yes.
like especially with Instagram, I think I found a good balance where with the main feed I'll usually just do announcement posts for the podcast when I'm going live, stuff like that. And then I'll use the stories for just my personal stuff, sharing memes and politics stuff and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, going back to the editing, that's most of what this is editing.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
people see the end product and they think that that's what you spent most of your time doing.
Yeah.
And I tend to have longer podcasts. I'll go for at least an hour. I've had one that went for 2 hours, and then that same person, we did this was somebody who we had some political not disagreements, but I mean, some issues that we saw differently. And so we did a live stream just talking about some stuff. And we went for 4 hours. I think it was like
Wow.
closer to 4.5 hours. And then he and I and another author who was on the podcast, we actually did another live stream last night that went for 2 hours. And if one of them didn't stop it, we would have still been going. And so as much time as it actually takes to sit down and have a conversation and be present and be engaged, it's only a fraction of what it takes to do this. And you're talking about editing out the uhs and the ums and stuff. I with my old podcast, it was audio only, and especially at the beginning, I say all the time.
Oh,
I would
yeah.
cut out every little thing. Anytime there was a space that I felt like was a little bit too long, I'd cut that out. I wanted it to be perfect. And especially because it wasn't on video, then you couldn't tell for the most part. And then especially when it came to video, number one, you would definitely be able to tell if for whatever reason I happen to be a little bit more fluent, speaking more fluently. But there we go, of course, as I'm saying it. You see how I talk, and if I tried to edit that out and clean that up to sound the way I want it to, then the video would just be a choppy mess.
Yeah.
And so I've had to just accept that this is the way I talk. I say a lot. I say I'll like no, actually I don't say like a lot, but I'll say if I'm trying to think of something, I'll be like, it's the thing. And it's just like, I wish I could just let my brain work, say the word, because then I just have one thing to cut out because when I do the clips, I do, I clean it up a little bit more. So I'll have the whole podcast that's just pretty much, unless there's anything we specifically need to cut out, I'll put the template on and add the mid-roll. Hey, make sure you subscribe and like and give me money on the support links and all that stuff. And then I'll just post it up. But of course, because those can be anywhere from an hour to 2.5, then, I like to make little clips, and that way I have something, if not every day, most days to release. And that's one of the big things about, finding, growth on YouTube is just consistency. Editing is editing.
Huge. And now, do you, and I'm going to flip the tables on you. Do you like working with mostly established authors, or do you have, because I know when I've interviewed like a debut author, some of them come in with a background, they know what they're doing and they're willing and ready to talk and they're pretty polished. Do you have debuts on every now and then, or, you're like, man, I wish I could edit this a lot more than I.
Well, yes, I have a lot of debut authors. But I think, there's been a couple that I wish were a little, they in terms of, their camera presence, I wish they were a little bit more, with it. Which I don't fault them for, if you're a writer, you're not a podcaster, especially not on video. But, I'm trying to make a show here. But it's actually because of the real focus being the person behind the book, it often doesn't really matter at which point in their career they are. And actually, the person I was just talking about, shout out Anna Rude, probably not even watching, but at the time that we recorded his episode, the book wasn't even published yet, which I didn't realize at the time. But the book was written, but it hadn't been published yet. And as we were just talking about, the conversation evolved into a lot of other things, and that was a nonfiction book. And so we were talking a lot about what was in the book, and even that spurred just a lot of other conversation. And so there's definitely a comfort when I sit down with someone and I can see, oh, okay, this person has done this before. This person can carry a conversation. They can, do the back and forth, all that kind of stuff. That's definitely more comforting. But I do also, enjoy flexing that muscle of having to carry a show when the other person is, kind of just like, giving one-word answers. And I've got to really especially if it's fiction and I can't ask about the topic itself. And I've got to find ways where I haven't talked to this person at all before. I've just as we did, kind of just exchanging information. I like to go in, as blind as possible. I haven't. I try not to look at the book, the cover of the book or the synopsis before I do the solo segment, and so it can be. It's definitely an exercise in thinking on your feet. To have somebody who is not necessarily ready to, really speak so much. Not that they're not open to have a conversation, but they're not able to do that. And so it varies. So it's definitely certainly a different type of conversation. But I find that because of the main goal of the podcast itself, it definitely works having that type of range. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's easier because I'm audio only at this point. So I can go clean things up if I've had to kind of coach a guest through. There's only been one or two guests where it was pretty clear that they really didn't know what they were doing. And honestly, I don't know that I've had them back. And the end product sounded okay by the time it was done, but there was a lot of coaching. But that hasn't stopped me from having debut authors on. I've had plenty, and will continue to. It's again, just like you said, when you're respecting the book itself, it's easy to have a guest on and just talk. And because I want to give them the voice and the platform to talk, it's a lot easier to do that, even if they're not all that experienced.
Right. And it's it's kind of patting myself on the back at the same time, but it is a nice thing to even if we are, well, let me put it back on myself. Even if I'm doing this because I want to get my face and my name and my message out there, I'm still, giving a platform to people who otherwise wouldn't. And even if my platform isn't that big yet, I'm fully committed to it, and I'm willing to put the time in. I see no reason why it shouldn't grow. I really genuinely hope that that these authors can get some exposure from this platform.
Yeah, I know my dream at some point is to be that host that when there is someone who's been comes from a marginalized voice, who is getting their book out there, and of course it's got to be a good book still. Like I still want it to move me. I still want to be engrossed in the story. I still want it to, you can't just put some drivel out on KDP right quick and come on the show. But I do want to be that kind of guy who says, or not, I'm saying it, but I want people to say that about me, that I lend people an opportunity to share their voice. That would be really, if I'm known for that, that'd be pretty cool.
That would be pretty cool. And to mirror that I think one of the things, I'm sure you share this, is to be, again, not only in the eyes of the viewers, the person to go to when, oh, okay, what book is Dan talking about this week?
Yeah.
To be that person. And then also to be the person that, okay, I've got a new book, I got to get in touch with Dan. That would be the dream.
Oh yeah.
Just be known to be that guy. So do you read the books of every guest?
The short answer is no. And I usually try and be pretty upfront about it. Yeah, that's actually what made me interested in your podcast. When I found out the name of your
I
podcast, I'm like,
found
wait,
the
this
life
guy's
hack.
this guy's doing this every week. This is great. so, at first, I really tried. I'll be, I just really did. But I'm not a super fast reader anyway, and it particularly in science fiction and fantasy side note, I'm not super interested in a lot of fantasy. It's got to be really good fantasy for me to get into, because I don't like learning new magic systems and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's a struggle anyway. I'm not a super fast reader. That's a struggle anyway. um but uh but there are some that I read, and what I'll try and do is read the first 3 or 4 chapters no matter what. That's what I try and do. And I figure by then, the inciting actions usually happened. The thing that's kicking off the whole story has happened by then, and it gives me enough to talk about characters and the world building. And then I'll read reviews on Amazon, Goodreads, things like that. And then, go to the author's website, learn about them. And then that usually gives me enough to delve into the story itself. And so that's what I'll do. So I would say for every, in a given month, having 4, give or take 4 authors on, I've probably read one of the books completely through.
Fair.
And then parts of the others.
What about audiobooks?
I spend so much of my audio time listening to other podcasts, or actually just listening to other podcasts, mostly making,
Yep.
developing my own craft as far as podcasting is concerned, bettering myself. I listen to some podcasts that just do that. Podcast about my own writing, to better my own writing. So that is, my car time is my self-development time. And so I don't do that. My wife wants me to. She thinks that I'll go through books like crazy.
Yeah.
But I just haven't done that yet.
I am in exactly the same, exactly in the same spot. There's a between YouTube and podcasts, sometimes, it's a podcast on YouTube, but there's a lot of, a lot of channels that I will follow to, not even just like new stuff, but, culture stuff. I'm into movies and TV. I'm a huge UFC fan. But so with that stuff, plus a lot of current event topical content, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, there's someone just talking in my ear, and if it's not a movie or TV show, and like I'll watch an old sitcom for when I go to sleep. But first thing I do when I wake up, go to YouTube, check my subscriptions, anything that has come out since I fell asleep the night before, put those on, and I listen at 2 times speed, because I need it. Like, let's go. And then I'm a private dog trainer, so I spend a lot of time in the car. And one of the YouTube channels that I really like is Entrepreneurs in Cars. Rich Cooper. He's it's like a men's channel.
I'll have to give that a listen.
He's great. And a lot of it is about women and dating and stuff, which is not something that I am super interested in spending the time and energy at this point in my life. But there is the reason that I like his channel is that that's not the focus of his channel. His whole thing is chase excellence, not women. And one of his things that has always stuck with me is to turn your car into a learning center. And I mean, I was already doing that, but I've got my podcasts and 2.4 speed in the car. The pocket cast can go up to I think like 3.5. But I just started one day, I was watching a video on YouTube just normally, and it was just kind of dragging a little bit, but I didn't want to click off of it. And I didn't even know about the playback speed toggle. And I just happened upon it, and I sped it up to 1.25, and I was like, oh, finally. And I forgot to turn it off, or to turn it back. And then there was another video that was a little bit even slower than that. And so I went to turn it up to 1.25, and then that was at it was already at 1.25. So I went to 1.5, and 1.25 became the new standard. And slowly I just kept moving up and up and up. And so that's part of the reason why reading has been so difficult to fit into my schedule, whether it is even if it is audiobooks. Because like you, I have my list of YouTube subscriptions, I have my list of podcasts, and I'm already jamming them in my ear as it is.
Yep.
And on these podcasts, there's always somebody who I admire and who I look up to, saying, "Oh, I've got this book, I've got that book," and it's like when am I supposed to read this book?
Right.
You're on another podcast that's in this list. I'm about to hear you talk again about this stuff before I get out of the car. And so that was really the genesis of this whole thing is like I don't want to have to read your book. And I don't think that, just a conversation or even a couple conversations with you is going to be a replacement for reading your book. But I'm fine with kind of, dipping my toe in more areas than I otherwise would be able to, and becoming that jack of all trades, master of none. Like, I don't need to be the smartest person in the world on any one given thing. I'd rather have some familiarity with a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, that's what your guest is for, right? They're the expert on that thing.
Exactly.
So that's why I think it's okay. I again, as long as you can respect the author or respect the guest, then you do what you can, right? You're still given a platform. They're still getting to talk about their book.
So yeah, and so given that you didn't plan to go past 10 episodes with your podcast, now that you're up in you're closing in on triple digits.
Yeah.
What do you see looking forward?
I see lots of things, but so one thing I'm actually my 2022 project is a nonfiction book based on some of the things I've learned from podcasting, primarily around apocalyptic fiction. And so I'm developing that right now. It's really not even safe to talk about because I haven't really nailed it down. But I'm developing some ideas about apocalyptic literature, primarily the transition in apocalyptic literature. This is going to bore everybody. I'm sorry, but here's what it is.
This is what we're here for.
From the 50s to late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of apocalyptic literature was about nuclear war and, the world ending that way. And then what was life after that? And then, and as the Cold War ended, even though there's plenty of nuclear weapons still around, even though they'd still obliterate the world 10 times over, the predominant apocalyptic fiction right now is based on climate fiction, which makes sense. That's the driving force of, the worry in the world right now. Or the detractors would say it's just a bunch of fear mongering. And so you got the two different sides arguing about it. And so that's the driver right now. So part of my research started that way. And I had a couple of climate fiction writers, and I had a couple of old school nuclear fiction writers on earlier on in my podcasting. And so it just kind of like, why, first of all, are we fascinated with the end? Is one of the questions that I'm seeking to answer. And I've started reaching out to some psychologists and some researchers about that. So first of all, why are we excited about the end? And obviously my religious background lends quite a bit to that too. So why are we fascinated with the end? And what does that say about us as a species? That we are so fascinated about the end. So I guess I ended up talking about it more than I planned to, but because of my podcasting that I've done in this, it's not a huge platform, but I've learned a lot about apocalyptic literature. And, is it something that I can kind of mutually build my writing and my podcasting at the same time? So that's my focus in 2022. It won't necessarily mean that I'm going to have more authors on that deal with apocalyptic writing, but I will have some. And then I have a goal, a number goal that I won't share online with you, but I'd be happy to share it offline and compare notes. I have what my average listen download is right now for my podcast per episode, and I have what I want to be by the end of the year. And so I have some goals as far as that's concerned too. And then I had Andy Weir on,
Nice.
who wrote The Martian. It was turned into a movie. He had a new book out this year. He was my guest for my 50th episode, so I'm kind of trying to already look ahead at who's my dream guest for episode 100.
Right.
And so I'm starting to reach out a little bit on that too. So that'll happen during this year, and then we'll just see what happens. That's kind of like that's where I'm at. What about you? What's your goal for 2022?
Pretty good plan for 20. I mean, I
Or
guess
do
I
you
haven't
even do
really.
it that way? Yeah, maybe you
No,
don't do it
yeah,
that way.
I don't really I don't really look at it in year by year or month by
Yeah.
month. Again, I did just start this podcast in September, so I am a little early on in terms of getting analytics and stuff like that. Right now it's more about building the platform into what I want it to be and figuring out, where exactly the niche is for the podcast and where exactly I can use that to springboard into other stuff. Like, I'm part of the New Jersey Cannabis Club. I'm a bunch of medical patients and dispensary workers and lawyers and stuff like that. And we did a stream on the channel a few weeks ago. And I mean, again, I think it went well. And definitely when we were speaking with the lawyer, it was great information. I felt like probably it wasn't going to get too much play with my subscribers, and it didn't. But that is my main focus: is what else can I do that people will care about. There is a lot that like in general, I would love to write a book. I think I think if I can get my thoughts in order, I can write a great book. I've got a lot of great thoughts, but they're just all over the place. Yeah. And so that was why I actually started the first podcast. Was like, okay, I'm not ready to write a book, but at least if I can, talk, because people don't talk anymore.
Yeah.
At least if I can sit and talk these things out, then maybe that'll help. And I think that's, helped in terms of getting some of my ideas out a little bit more. But definitely as I do this podcast, that is, a lot of times I'll ask, if there's time, I'll ask the author about the publishing process, because, just learning about, what it's like and what I can do. And then, I mean, if I can, I mean, I'm very happy at my job. And so if this stays a hobby for a decent amount of time, I'm okay with that. But I definitely do want this to be at least not, if even if it's not my main source of income. I don't remember if I said I'm a private dog trainer. So I could very easily do that on the side to supplement whatever YouTube isn't making. But I would like this to be my my job, my primary source of income. And so how I'm gonna get there, what exactly that looks like, I'm not exactly sure yet, but I'm closely paying attention to the metrics that I can use to determine where I am, how well I'm doing, what I can, all that kind of stuff. So it's a little up in the air right now. But especially as far as the podcast, definitely just about growing numbers, getting bigger authors. And I swear I'd stop saying it, but of course that is nothing against the smaller authors that we've had. But again, I'm trying to run a show here. And if I can get somebody who their name being in the title is going to get people to click. That's the first goal. That's the number one on my list. And so, if I can get there, then the next thing will be getting maybe a certain number of subscriber count, or probably getting monetized. I think you need like 1,000 subscribers and 400 watch hours, which is a lot more than it seems.
It is.
So small steps, but especially for YouTube, the path is a little bit more laid out, I think.
Yeah.
Podcasting is a little bit more kind of a free for all, I feel like. There's not as much, I guess mainly, maybe it's because there is a YouTube and like Spotify or whatever you're using is just grabbing RSS feeds. Whatever reason, it just seems that YouTube is not an easier, but a clearer path.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And so, however that can come about, that would be ideal.
Yeah, agreed.
So we've been going for about an hour. I don't want to take up too much of your time. But if somebody who's not heard your podcast before, and let's say they watch my podcast, and this is how they are learning about books and this and that, what would you say that you can offer to that person, or maybe somebody who doesn't even care about books?
So what I like to tell people is that I want to introduce them to the next book they're going to want to read. And so, if they're not, kind of like, I kind of like your podcast again, not to, blow your head up or anything, but like introducing people to a book that like is that they wouldn't have heard about in the beginning or are on their own is kind of a neat concept. It's an idea I like doing. And so I like to tell people that I want to introduce them to a book they didn't know they wanted to read. And so that would be the reason to listen to the episodes, to listen to the podcast. And then we do talk about issues periodically that are really interesting. I would say if there's someone who's an aspiring writer, you're going to learn a ton by listening to Coffee and Space, a ton, because we do talk about world building a lot. We talk about developing characters, plotting versus pantsing, all these things. I could turn it into a how-to on writing, except that I don't have the blockbusters to push it, but aspiring writers would get a lot out of it too.
That's a phenomenal point. And I just like to double that. And that's absolutely, if you are a writer, then podcasts like both of ours, where we are talking to people who have done it. And sometimes I've done it multiple times. Sometimes people have been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
I think, at least for me, sitting down and deciding, okay, now I'm going to start writing my book. That seems like it's going to be the hardest part. I can, like if I'm on, Facebook used to be my biggest social media platform, just because I ramble and I'll talk and I'll talk and I'll talk. So instead of having these long Twitter threads, I would just, write on Facebook. And, between the atheism stuff and my political stuff, most people probably unfollowed me, if not unfriended me years ago. But I just kind of was using it as like a kind of like a journal thing, like, not too much like a diary, but just a place to say things, and not necessarily for other people. But then as they started cracking down on language and everything, I actually got 2 consecutive 30-day bans for
nice.
One was for quoting the movie Happy Gilmore, which I will remind everybody is rated PG-13. I wrote "The price is wrong, bitch" with the GIF, and 30-day ban. Then I came back, and the same day I came back, I was in this group where it's an all guys group, and just like talking about cars and families, and and posting pictures of girls, and just like, oh, she's hot, but just kind of among other things. It wasn't like some Simp Central. And these couple guys came in, and anytime there was a picture of a girl, they would go in the comments, be like, "Oh, look at these simps." I'm like, dude, that's not what simping is. Like, so I just commented sarcastically, "Yeah, because women are so yucky." 30-day ban.
Wow.
Like, and so, I mean, luckily that was enough. That 60 days was enough to kind of break my habit. And so I really don't even use Facebook that much anymore. But point being, I can write a lot better than I can speak. And so I think if I can get myself to a place where I'm ready to do the writing, I think I'll be off to the races. And so to anybody else who is in a similar position, definitely podcasts like Coffee in Space and I Didn't Read Your Book will definitely help you write your own.
Yeah, I think so.
So if there is anything that you want to plug, any websites, the podcast, social media, all that stuff, the floor is yours.
Well, I've tried to do a pretty good job of keeping it all in one place. So if you just go to the website, you can see everything. coffeeinspacepodcast.com. coffeeinspacepodcast.com. I've got a link for all my social contacts there. There's a link to listen to the show. It'll take you straight to it. And then I've got some commentary like you. I touch on certain topics every now and then. And then I have a blog on there where I talk about episodes. But coffeeinspacepodcast.com, everything's there.
Beautiful. And we'll have that link below. I'll go through and I'll find all the good stuff for you.
Yeah.
So definitely check the description below. Check out the podcast. Follow Dan. Thank you so much for coming on the platform. This is
thanks for having me.
Not a problem. This is a really, really cool conversation. I enjoyed comparing notes. You know, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but it's really cool to see that you know, somebody else who's doing something similar. And a little bit further on, I'm on I'm releasing episode 16 next week, so you're a little bit farther on than I am. It's been really cool. So I definitely want to thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me here. It's been great. It's been cool tossing ideas back and forth. That's what's been neat.
Definitely. We'll definitely have to do something again.
Yeah, I think so. I think we can work this faith issue into it somehow.
Ooh, you're speaking my language. Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah.
All right. So tune in next time for a heated debate about religion. All right. Good. Thanks again, Dan.
Yeah, man. Take care.
All right. So I would like to pat myself on the back. I think I did pretty good not getting too into politics. And I want to thank Dan because it was easy to stay away from that stuff because the conversation we were having was super interesting. You know, he's been doing this a bit longer than I have. And, you know, like I was saying in the episode, if only I had started during the lockdown, then who knows where I'd be by now. But didn't do it, so we're here now. Definitely going to be able to. We are definitely going to bring Dan back and have political discussions, religious discussions. That is for sure going to happen. But I think I did a pretty good job of keeping this about what we wanted to talk about. And it's very interesting. You know, we talked numbers after the episode, and you know, his podcast is doing well, and it gives me hope that, you know, the next step is right in front of me. And what I mean by that is the goals that you set for yourself, whatever they may be, whether it's a subscriber count or a guest get or whatever it is, it's not always super clear when you're doing this how to get from point A to point B, and it's a learning on the job type of thing. You've just got to start and learn as you go. You got to just figure it out. And just like he had no intention of going past 10 episodes, it was just a thing to pass the time. He found his rhythm, he's found his flow, and it's become something, and it's becoming bigger. And that's what we're all trying to do, right? I'm really curious as to your guys' opinion. I think I shared a lot of what I had to say with Dan because that's what we were talking about. But I'm interested, you know, are you gonna listen to Coffee and Space? Is that he specifically will talk to fantasy, sci-fi, fiction writers, whereas I'll talk to anybody, and I have an easier time. I don't want to say I prefer it, but I have an easier time speaking with nonfiction writers simply because of the fact that I can talk about a concept rather that I'm somewhat familiar with, or that I can be familiarized with, as opposed to a specific story. When obviously they don't want to give away the story in a podcast. But again, I've said this before and I will say it again, fiction writers, if you are on the podcast, don't be too stingy on the spoilers. Not as many people as you think will put 2 and 2 together, and not as many people are going to even know that what a spoiler. Not that many people are going to remember a little comment that you make before they've even finished listening to a podcast about a book they never heard about before, even if they're going to go buy it right after. Definitely, I think a number of episodes I've failed you guys by not not asking the right questions and pushing a little further to get a little bit more information about the fiction stories. So that's something I'm going to work on in the future. But what else came up for you as you were watching the two, Dan and I, speak? What do you like about what he said and what he's doing? And what do you think, what do you think he does better? What do you think I do better? What do you think? I just want to know what you think. What do you think? So let me know in the comments below. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoy this and you want to see more content. Anything else? I know this wasn't a typical type of episode, and I don't have a book for you to either recommend or whatever, but I really did feel like this was going to be an interesting conversation, not only for me, but for you as well. And hopefully that was the case. So don't forget, I also have those support links in the description below. The more that you help, the better the product will be. But more important than that is making sure you like, subscribe, sharing the video really helps. I just got to get into that algorithm. Once I can get into the algorithm and they start showing my stuff to more people, then I'll get bigger and I can get bigger guests. You can do more stuff, all of that stuff. It's just momentum. So I need your guys' help. I cannot do it alone. Even if you can't afford to throw me a few bucks, that's completely fine. That's completely fine. Just hit the like button, hit the share button, and sit at home and think about how awesome I really am. Thank you once again. This has been the I Didn't Read Your Book podcast. I am Lutch. Don't forget to follow me on socials at IDRYBlutch, and I will see you guys next time.